Dust hung thick in the golden air, swirling around the stillness of the sunlit afternoon. The fields of corn stood tall and unwavering, their leaves rustling softly in the gentle breeze. It was a quiet day in the heart of the countryside, a day that would soon erupt into chaos. An ominous shadow suddenly broke the serene sky, casting an elongated rectangle across the earth. A truck, dark and menacing, pulled in fast, stirring the dust into a whirlpool of uncertainty. The engine growled like a beast hungry for action, but as the truck rolled to a stop, its tar-black tires leaving marks on the gravel, something stirred in the heart of Farmer Joe. He looked up from his work, sun-caked hands gripping the wooden handle of the hoe, and squinted against the glare. The farmer had seen many things in his lifetime: storms that drenched and winds that howled, but today was different. Today it felt like a storm was brewing, not in the sky but on the ground right here in his very own field. The air thickened as the passenger door flew open, and out stepped a figure clad in a heavy leather jacket, the kind that spoke of trouble and mischief. Something in the way the stranger moved, the way he swaggered, sent a primal jolt through Joe. Time seemed to slow. The moment was charged like the calm before a thunderclap. Joe's heart clenched at the thought of his land, the months spent tilling, planting, and nurturing every single stalk of corn. "Hey, old man," the stranger called with a smirk that felt like ice sliding under the sun. The words dripped with menace, echoing across the emptiness of the fields. Farmer Joe straightened, a storm gathering within him. Whatever this man wanted, he would not hand it over easily. Joe was no stranger to hard work nor hard times. He had weathered losses, been betrayed, and had seen his fair share of deceit pass through these lands. The stranger may have arrived fast, but Farmer Joe was ready to pull faster. Joe asked, his voice steady, though his heart raced against the threat. The stranger took a few steps forward, his boots crunching on the gravel, power in every deliberate motion. The man's eyes glinted like sharp glass, filled with a dangerous mix of confidence and reckless ambition. "I'm talking about your land." He gestured vaguely with his hand, dismissing years of sweat and toil as if they were mere threads of grass. "It's seen better days, Joe. You should let someone else take care of it. Someone." Farmer Joe felt a fire ignite within him, hotter than the noonday sun. This man thought he could waltz right in, threaten his way into taking what was his. Joe's jaw tightened. The land wasn't just dirt and crops to him. It was family, heritage, tradition. His father had worked this land and his grandfather before him. It was the bloodline they had rooted deep into the soil, roots as old as the trees lining the edge of his property. "No one's taking this land from me," Joe replied, his voice low but filled with conviction. The tension thickened like storm clouds against the horizon, ready to release their downpour. The stranger laughed, a rough, mirthless sound that echoed around them. "You really think you can stand against me? I could bulldoze this place and leave nothing but scraps if I wanted." But Farmer Joe wasn't one to back down from a fight. His dedication flowed through him like an unyielding river. He stepped forward, facing the threat with an ironclad resolve some would call foolish, but he knew better. "You don't know me," Joe said, breathing deeply as he narrowed his gaze on the intruder. The tension hung like a heavy mist, and for a brief moment it seemed as if time itself held its breath. Then, with a sudden movement, the stranger lunged, a flash of violence that sent adrenaline surging through the farmer's veins. Joe, instinctively reacting, pivoted and shot forward, driven by years of hard work, instinct, and desperation. He grabbed the first thing he could, a rusted shovel propped against a barn wall, and swung it around, its blade glinting menacingly in the sunlight. The clamor rang out like thunder as the blade met the air, slicing through the silence. A primal battle ensued, the farmer's movements fueled by years of labor and love for his land. Joe was no novice when it came to fighting. The farm had taught him lessons in resilience, hard work, and survival. With an intensity that came from deep within, he maneuvered with grace and certainty, each blow a testament to his determination. The intruder stumbled backward, surprise etched across his face. Joe didn't back down. He pressed on, pushing against the encroaching fear, fueled by a whirlwind of emotion. Anger, desperation, defiance, it surged within him like wildfire, pushing him to fight for what was his. Joe yelled, and the sheer force of his will surged through him, filling him with a power that shocked even himself. He felt the energy of the earth pulsate beneath him, the history of his ancestors somehow channeling through his body, lending strength to his feet. As the two grappled, the landscape itself seemed to shift. Each movement kicked up dust, swirling around them, forging an arena of conflict. The sun beamed down, witness to the struggle of man against both man and the unknown. Farmer Joe swung low, gaining the advantage. He could feel the tide turning in his favor, a sensation eerily satisfying. The stranger's bravado shattered with each failed attempt to overpower the determined farmer. Leverage was on Joe's side. His knowledge of the land flowed through his veins. One last struggle and the intruder found himself pinned to the ground, Joe's foot pressing firmly against the chest of this man who dared to threaten his future. "This is my life," Joe declared, breathless and resolute, the weight of generations pressing upon his shoulders. "You think you can just come here and take it from me?" Fear flickered in the stranger's eyes, and for a fleeting moment, vulnerability broke the hardened shell of his confidence. "Let me go," he muttered, breathless and defeated. With a heavy heart but an unwavering will, Farmer Joe finally released him, watching the man scurry back to his truck, the rattling of the doors signaling defeat. The truck roared to life, and as it pulled away, Joe felt the dust settle around him, the sound of the engine fading into the distance like whispers of a bygone storm. A calming quiet enveloped the fields once more, wrapping around Farmer Joe like a comforting embrace. He bent down, placing a hand on the warm earth. This land wasn't just soil. It was alive, breathing, holding stories of those before him. The fear lingered like a ghost, brushing against his mind, but in that moment the victory tasted sweet. Yet, victories are rarely absolute. As the sun began to dip low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and orange, Farmer Joe caught his breath, the weight of the confrontation beginning to settle. He realized deep inside that while he had defended his property, there was more at stake in this battle. The fight was not just against one man, but against the very tide of change, the forces that sought to erase the past and wipe out traditions long cherished. People like the stranger, intent on tearing down and reconstructing, were becoming more common. Joe understood it wasn't just his fight. It was a struggle for every farmer, every landholder, every family that had put roots down into the earth. Today, he had fought for his patch of land, but tomorrow, what would he do? The thought of losing it all again sent shivers down his spine. Would he need to fight again? Was it even possible to keep the encroaching world at bay? As Joe walked back to his house, he took one last glance at the field stretching before him, golden and full of promise. Resilience, courage, and heart had seen him through the darkness of today, but he knew the real question lay ahead. Could he find the strength to continue standing tall, even as shadows grew longer and more menacing? For now, the sunset washed over him, a gentle reminder of the journey ahead. Farmer Joe, who had pulled faster than a speeding truck, felt the weight of his decision. He knew the challenges were many, but so was the legacy he would protect. The roar of a truck engine shattered the tranquility that hung heavy in the air. It thundered down the dusty road, a storm cloud on wheels, sending a plume of dirt into the sunlight. Farmer Sam was knee-deep in the sweet, loamy earth, hands working tirelessly to knead the land back to life after a long winter. The fields were beginning to show promise, green shoots breaking through the soil, a symphony of new beginnings. But the engine's growl didn't sound like a friendly neighbor. It sounded like trouble. He straightened up, wiping the sweat from his brow, and squinted toward the noise. The truck shot around the bend, kicking up more dust, its wheels spinning like a whirlwind on a mission. Something about the way it barreled and sent a chill down his spine. Farmer Sam had lived through enough seasons to recognize when danger was approaching. As the truck slid to a halt, he felt the ground shift beneath him, an instinctual pulse urging him to be ready. The engine sputtered and died, the rumbling stopping abruptly, leaving behind a heavy silence that felt oppressive, as if the world itself held its breath. With a creak of the door, a figure emerged, a man clad in black, with a leather jacket and the kind of swagger that screamed trouble. He was a stranger to Sam, and familiarity brought comfort to the farmer, a sense of community, of bonds stretched deep through time and land. This man, however, made the hairs on the back of Sam's neck stand upright. "Hey there," the stranger drawled, stepping into the sunlight, an unsettling grin spreading across his face. Sam echoed, hoping to peel back the layers of this encounter. He took a careful step forward, arms crossed over his chest, glancing behind to the small farmhouse where his wife Marlene was tending to their little garden. The man chuckled, a low and sinister chuckle that wound around the air like smoke. "I want your land, old man," he replied, his tone dripping with arrogance. "You've run this place long enough, don't you think?" Sam felt the words land like stones in his stomach. "This land has been in my family for generations. Oh, it's not a matter of letting." The man stepped closer, every word laced with a threat. "There's big money to be made, and I'm here to make sure you don't stand in the way." The air grew heavy with tension, thick enough to slice through. Sam's heart raced. He felt an undeniable surge of anger, a primal instincts igniting within him. This wasn't just about land, this was about legacy, about the roots his family had planted deep into the soil over decades. This was about fight or flight, and he wasn't about to walk away quietly. "Get off my property," Sam warned, voice firm but steady. The stranger took a step back, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can stand against me?" A fierce storm brewed in Sam's chest, each heartbeat reverberating with the weight of his principles. Behind him, the fields whispered the tales of the past. The droughts weathered, the storms survived. But this threat felt different, something darker. The question of what would happen next loomed over him, its shadows stretching long across the land. In that electrifying moment, the truck's engine felt like an angry heartbeat, a warning. Sam's instincts screamed for action. Stepping forward to meet the man's gaze, he stood firm, strength pouring from him like the very soil he tilled. "I won't ask you again." But the stranger just laughed, his voice heavy with arrogance. Before Sam could react, the man lunged forward, attempting to grab him. Adrenaline surged through Sam's veins. He wasn't ready to become a victim, not here, not today. With a swift motion, he sidestepped the attacker, instinct kicking in as he grabbed a rusty pitchfork left lying against the nearby barn. Sam shouted, brandishing the pitchfork like a warrior lifting his sword. The metal glimmered in the dim sunlight, reflecting the resolve behind Sam's eyes. The moment hung in the air, suspended between two wills, one a ruthless aggressor and the other a determined protector. Fear dripped from the stranger's bravado, slowly melting away, leaving behind a cracked veneer of confidence. Sam's voice thundered, his heart thumping like a war drum. In a split second, the man hesitated, a flickered doubt breaking through his bravado. Sam seized the moment. With a fierce determination, he lunged. The pitchfork struck the earth beside the would-be thief with a force that sent vibrations reverberating through his bones. Time seemed to still as their eyes locked. The stranger took an involuntary step back, a mixture of fear and anger twisting his features. Sam could see the shift happening, a crack forming in the man's arrogance, revealing a flicker of uncertainty. He felt like an unstoppable force, fueled not only by the love for his land but the very essence of who he was. Sam demanded, voice low and steady, "You want what I've built with my hands, my sweat, my blood." The stranger's bravado snapped like a twig. He spat, backing away towards the truck, but not before throwing a final threat. "You'll regret this, old man. Maybe you'll regret crossing this farmer," Sam shot back, his grip tightening on the pitchfork. The world seemed to hold its breath as the stranger climbed back into his truck, slamming the door behind him. The engine roared to life, choking on the dust that hung thick in the air, but it felt like a retreat, a surrender wrapped in frustration. For a split second, Sam felt victorious, a wave of triumph swept over him, and all that hard work and sacrifice stretched out before him, palpable and real. But as the truck peeled away, heart racing with both adrenaline and fear, he knew this wasn't the end. He walked back toward the farmhouse, the weight of the encounter settling upon him like a heavy cloak. Each step felt heavy with uncertainty. Was it over? What could come next? The idea of standing alone against a force like that gnawed at him, a deep-seated anxiety clawing at his mind. Marlene emerged from the quiet of the garden, her hands covered in soil, a puzzled look knitting her brow. She asked, her voice breaking the silence, He inhaled deeply, grounding himself with conviction. She deserved to know, and even more so, to feel his strength. A man wanted to take our land, he replied, eyes meeting hers with determination. Marlene's eyes widened with concern, and she stepped closer, instinctively seeking reassurance in his presence. No, he reassured, though the mere thought of the encounter brought anxiety bubbling back. Both the embrace of the land and the confrontation lingered heavily in his heart. The gravity of their conversation pressed around them, their world suddenly teetering on the edge of uncertainty. Sam felt the walls of their love, their bond, tight even more, woven with resilience and purpose. We need to be ready. That night, as the sun set in a brilliant blaze of oranges and purples, painting the sky in colors that seemed to whisper promises of another day, Farmer Sam couldn't shake the heaviness. They sat together on the porch, watching the shadows stretch long, deep into the fields that had become their lifeblood. I never wanted this, Sam confessed, his voice low as crickets began their evening symphony. Marlene squeezed his hand, her warmth cutting through the shadows. And you will. Her unwavering resolve fortified his own, stitching together a sense of hope through the dark uncertainty. But Sam couldn't ignore the gnawing concern. Day after day passed, and with every lull, the threat loomed larger in his mind. Talks with neighbors confirmed the man's intentions, his plans to tear down the old fields and erect high rises, a testament to progress that came at the expense of history. They spoke of a world that pushed older generations aside, casting shadows over lives that bore stories worth sharing. And yet, for every encroaching threat, Sam felt a fire ignite within him. He shared tales with Marlene on moonlit nights, walking the fields, hopes and fears swelling together under the stars. They strengthened their resolve, practicing defenses and planning how to protect their sanctuary against the ruthless march of a new age. The gathering storm finally culminated on the day the man returned, a specter of his former self, determination carved deep into his features. With a band of men beside him, he found Farmer Sam, pitchfork on hand, ready to defend his realm. It was a standoff, a battle that thrummed through the air, the earth beneath them quaking with shared histories and futures hanging in the balance. Sam's heart thundered, but the rhythm was steady, sir. Ain't no way you're getting my land, he called out, voice echoed by the unwavering spirit of decades past. The weight of the histories, the sacrifices, the dreams all converged within his chest like an orchestra playing a symphony of defiance. The stranger replied, voice taut, unwelcome words shoved in his face. But every mention of loss summoned the faces of those who had come before him, every parent, every child who had walked these paths, every seed sown into the earth. They rose within him like a tempest, bathing him in their legacy. We'll see about that, Sam countered, words fueled by a hope that burned brighter than the fear. In the struggle that ensued, both sides collided like thunder and lightning, each push, each jab echoing down generations. Through it all, something began to shift within Sam. This fight was not just for the land. It was a fight for every farmer, every heartfelt laborer, every soul who valued legacy over fleeting ambition. As the struggle carried on, the landscape churned beneath them, echoing the fight within. Farmer Sam felt the strength of the earth beneath his feet, the veins of history pulsing in time with his heart. They pushed back against destruction, back against the racing tides of modernity. Each straining moment stabilized his faith, and in that charged atmosphere, Sam realized that though the fight was hard and the threat was real, the spirit of the land, the weight of its stories, and the fierce love for those who walked beside him were stronger than anything that threatened to tear them apart. As the dust began to settle, both sides worn and exhausted, it dawned upon Sam they were standing their ground. In the battle of wills, he had pulled faster than the crashing divides of change, faster than the fleeting shadows of doubt. They had claimed their space, and the victory, however minor, felt monumental. A sense of calm washed over him, the storm of uncertainty calming for now. Sam turned to see Marlene, her eyes shining with pride and unbroken resolve. Together, they stood in solidarity, once more two hearts, more entwined than ever before, braving the tempest together. In the silent aftermath, watching the sun descend beyond the horizon, Sam knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. But whatever the world threw at them, they would face it together, hand in hand with the strength of the earth beneath their feet, the courage of those who came before them rising high. The fight was far from over, but they were ready. And as always, Farmer Sam would pull faster when it mattered most. The sun blazed high in the sky, casting a golden light over the fields of green that stretched endlessly in every direction. Farmer Frank was bent low, hands buried deep in the soil, coaxing life out of the earth that had nourished his family for generations. Each seed he planted was a hope, a story waiting to unfold. But on this seemingly ordinary day, something heavy hung in the air, shifting the atmosphere around him. A rumble disturbed the peaceful hum of the farm. It was not the wind or the chirping of birds, but the low roar of a truck approaching fast. Frank looked up, dirt on his hands and a flicker of apprehension in his chest. He'd seen the townsfolk come to visit their quiet farm on occasion, but this was different. This truck didn't belong to anyone he recognized. The engine growled louder as it pulled onto the gravel drive, dust spiraling up like a storm cloud. Frank's heart began to thud in his chest. He placed his tools down, wiping the sweat from his brow as he squinted against the blaring sun. His instincts screamed that this wasn't a friendly visit. The truck screeched to a halt, tires kicking loose stones across the gravel like shrapnel from a sudden explosion. The driver's door flung open, revealing a man in a leather jacket, the kind that dripped with an aura of menace and bravado. He stepped out with a swagger that felt out of place in Frank's serene world, every movement brimming with a kind of aggression that put Frank on high alert. The man called out, flashing a grin that was more menacing than friendly. Frank squared his shoulders, a heavy silence stretching between them. He asked, keeping his voice steady despite the simmering tension in the air. The stranger, with a gleam of trouble in his eyes, strolled toward Frank, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Name's Rick," he said, his tone casual, but the undercurrent held an edge. Frank felt his stomach knot. "I'm not interested in any propositions, especially not from someone who rolls up in a truck like that." Rick chuckled, ignoring the dismissal. "You don't understand, do you? This land isn't what it once was. It's ripe for development, buddy. High rises, shopping centers, big bucks." Frank squinted hard, grounding himself in the warmth of the sun. It was as if the world had suddenly tilted off its axis. This land was a treasure, steeped in tradition and history, each furrow whispering stories of his ancestors who had toiled it before him. "This isn't just about dollars and cents. This is my home," Frank replied, voice steady and fierce. Rick's smirk widened, amusement flashing in his eyes. "Home is just a word, really." He waved a hand dismissively. "You can't kid yourself. The world is moving on and you're here clutching onto what? Corn." Anger shot through Frank like lightning. "You think you can just come here and scare me into selling what I've built?" He took a step forward, fists clenching at his sides, every fiber in his being urging him to stand tall against the encroaching threat. "Scare you? No, my friend, I'm here to offer you a way out," Rick retorted, his tone hardening. "You think these old fields will do anything but wither away? There's no future in farming anymore." Frank's chest tightened with a mixture of rage and panic. Behind Rick, the sun glared down, illuminating the truck that felt like a giant looming over his cherished patch of earth. The thoughts and worries of his neighbors flickered through his mind, fellow farmers who faced the same relentless march of progress, the struggle between heritage and modernity. "Leave my land," Frank said, voice low but filled with conviction. Rick laughed, the sound dark and unsettling. "You really think you can fight me? You're just one man. I've got resources, people backing me." The tension cracked like a whip in the stillness of the afternoon. Adrenaline surged through Frank, igniting the fight-or-flight instinct that had been honed over decades. He glanced around, the familiar landscape field swaying gently in the wind. The barn standing proud reminded him of all that had been fought for and carved into the earth. In that moment, something deep within him ignited, a fierce, unyielding resolve. "Then let's see what happens," Frank declared, his voice echoing off the old barn. Before he could think twice, Frank lunged forward, his mind racing with survival instincts kicking into high gear. He grabbed a pitchfork that stood propped against the barn, feeling the smooth handle known to him since childhood. It was not just a tool but a symbol of defiance, a bridge between generations of farmers who had worked to protect their land. Rick's confident sneer faltered as he saw the pitchfork glint in the light. He called, half sneering, half worried. "I'm defending my home," Frank replied, gnashing his teeth. A pulse of chaos ignited between them, the world narrowing to the point where only survival existed. This was not merely a confrontation. It was a battle for dignity, for legacy, for everything Frank held dear. Both men squared off, eyes locked in an unyielding stare, the pitchfork raised and the air crackling with raw energy. "All right then," Rick sneered, stepping back slightly but not showing true fear. "You want to play it like that?" And then, like two forces of nature colliding, they surged forward. Frank charged, the weight of his ancestors behind him, the earth rumbling beneath his feet. Every swing of the pitchfork echoed with purpose. The clash turned into a whirlwind of movement dust swirling around them, adrenaline twisting the air electric. Frank was fueled by the memories of labor, the sweat, the toil, the struggles and triumphs that had shaped him into this very moment. Each thrust of the pitchfork wasn't just for his land. It was for every farmer who had ever faced opposition. This was for their passion, for love, for legacy. They tangled in fierce movements, a ballet of desperation and determination. Frank felt the power of the earth beneath him, an unbreakable force sustaining him, giving rise to strength. Rick, caught off guard by Frank's relentless intensity, found himself stumbling back. Rick exclaimed, incredulity tangling with the panic in his voice as he evaded a quick jab with the pitchfork. Frank shouted back, voice steady despite the chaos, as he lunged again, each movement a testament to his spirit. "This is my life." Every move brought Frank closer to victory, fueled by a fire that burned hotter than he anticipated. "You're not just taking corn or beans," he grunted, sweat pouring down his face. "You're taking history." The struggle continued, each push and pull forcing both men deeper into their wills. Rick was losing ground, doubt flickering across his face as Frank's conviction pierced the veil of his bravado. It was no longer just a fight. It had morphed into a clash of characters, ideologies, and ambitions. And then it happened. Frank threw one final desperate strike, the pitchfork thrusting forward, ensuring he wouldn't be shoved off his land. Rick stumbled backward, caught by surprise, and lost his footing in the gravel. The look in his eyes was a decisive shift, a man caught in the web of his own making. He shouted, finally yielding. Frank seized the moment, his heart thundering with triumph and fury. "I'll never regret standing up for what's mine," he declared, breathing heavily, adrenaline pulsing through his veins. Rick retreated to his truck, the defeat evident as he slid into the driver's seat. Frank felt a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief as he watched the truck roar to life, kicking up dust and gravel, the intruder vanishing down the dirt road. For a moment, Frank stood alone in the fading sunlight, heart racing yet calm. His breath came heavy, but it felt lighter with each passing moment. The battle may have been won, but the specter of future threats loomed just beyond the horizon. As he turned back to the fields, the calm of the land washed over him like a soothing balm. The crops swayed gently in the breeze, whispering the stories of resilience, the dedication of those before him pulsating through the fibers of the earth. A sense of victory blossomed in his chest, mingling with the deep-rooted anxiety of knowing the world was changing. That evening, Frank sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the edge of the fields, painting the sky with strokes of orange and pink. It was a moment of reflection. He thought of the fight he'd just endured, how the heat of confrontation had ignited a new hunger within him. He mused over the challenges that lay ahead, but this time it felt different. He felt ready. As dusk descended, his wife Julia came outside, a worried look etched into her features. He looked at her, the woman who had stood by his side through thick and thin. "I'm fine, Julia," he reassured her. "Stranger came by, tried to take our land from us, but I told him this plot wasn't just dirt, it's our legacy." A smile spread across her face, pride shining in her eyes. "I knew you could handle it," she replied, taking his hand and squeezing it tightly. "But we need to be ready." Frank nodded, the determined spark igniting again within him, knowing she was right. They didn't live in an idyllic world. Challenges were real and looming, but together they were stronger. "I'll fight like hell to keep this farm," he declared, resolve burning fiercely in his heart. Hours slipped away, the stars emerging one by one, twinkling like promises in the vast sky. Frank took a deep breath, feeling the weight of generations on his shoulders, a legacy intertwined with the soil, the fields, and the stories they held. He understood now that it wasn't just about crops. It was about standing up for what mattered, about joining hands in the battle for their way of life. As the world turned around him, he knew he would face whatever came next, ready to pull faster whenever the storm approached again. Like the vines reaching upward toward the sun, he would grow, adapt, and fight back, not just for himself, but for every farmer, every heartbeat rooted deep in the love of the land they called home. A truck barreled down the dirt road, dust swirling in its wake like a tornado set loose. The engine roared, cutting through the stillness of the countryside like a knife. Farmer Joe looked up from his work, brow furrowed, sensing something was off. He had spent years nurturing this land, pouring his heart and soul into every furrow and seed, and now an unwelcome shadow lurked on the outskirts of his peaceful existence. As the truck veered onto his property, the gravel crunched under its tires, sending a shockwave of apprehension through Joe's chest. He wiped the sweat from his brow, squinting against the harsh sunlight, and watched as the vehicle came to a stop. The driver's door creaked open, revealing a figure in a dark jacket, a confidence about him that felt entirely misplaced here. The stranger called out, grinning like a predator sizing up its prey. Joe slid his hands into his pockets, muscles tightening with unease. There was something about the way the man leaned against the truck, a devil-may-care attitude that sent a chill down Joe's spine. Joe asked, voice steady but tinged with an underlying tension. "Name's Rick," the man replied. "I'm here to talk about your land. You see, it's prime real estate now. I figured it's time you cash in." Joe's stomach twisted. "This land has been in my family for generations." Rick shrugged, crossing his arms. "You're just a farmer, Joe. You don't see the bigger picture. I could help you get a nice fat check and you could retire." A fire ignited within Joe, the years of toil and love for the earth surging to the forefront. "This is my life. My family built this place from the ground up." Rick chuckled, an arrogant laughter that echoed across the fields. "You're being naive, my friend. Times are changing." Joe felt his heart race, the implications of Rick's words pressing heavily on him. The land stretched around him, vibrant and alive, and he could see the echoes of his ancestors in every row of corn and every blade of grass. He sensed a storm brewing, and not just in the sky. "I'll tell you what," Joe said, stepping forward, determination hardening his resolve. "Why don't you turn around and get back in that truck?" Rick's grin faded, replaced by a look of surprise that quickly transformed into irritation. "You really think you can stand against me? I've got resources, I know people." Joe stood tall, fists clenching at his sides. "That patch of dirt is my home. It's where my family lived and died." For a moment, it seemed like the world stood still, silence enveloping them like a thick blanket. The air grew heavy, tinged with tension. Joe felt the earth beneath him pulse with a rhythm that was both fierce and protective. And then it happened. With a speed that startled even himself, Rick lunged toward Joe, the suddenness of it sending a shock through his core. Joe instinctively stepped aside, grabbing a nearby pitchfork that stood sentinel against the barn, ready to defend his home. Joe shouted, brandishing the pitchfork, its metal glinting ominously in the sunlight like a sword ready for battle. Rick hesitated, surprise flashing in his eyes as he realized this wasn't going to end quietly. He spat, backpedaling slightly, veins pulsing with aggression and disbelief. "Maybe," Joe roared back, his heart racing but his voice steady. The tension ignited into chaos as the two figures clashed in a whirlwind of wills. Dust swirled around them, the earth seeming to come alive as they grappled, not just for land, but for dignity, for pride, for legacy. Joe felt the weight of years pressing down on him, years of hard work, sweat, and love churning into an unstoppable force that propelled him forward. Rick, caught off guard by Joe's resolve, stumbled back. He shouted, struggling to regain his footing. Joe yelled, heart pounding in his chest. With every thrust of the pitchfork, he felt empowered, every movement fueled by the stories of his ancestors who had fought and bled on this very soil. This wasn't just about defending a piece of ground. It was a battle for his very identity. The sun glared down on them, and in that brutal light, the clash became more than physical. It was a war of ideals, one man clinging to the earth, its history, while the other stood for progress at any cost. Rick finally shouted, backing away, fear creeping into his bravado. But Joe pressed on, each conviction pushing him further into the fray, refusing to let fear take root. He declared, voice like thunder over the fields, powerful and alive. With one final thrust of determination, Joe stepped closer and swung the pitchfork, its sharp end digging into the gravel beside Rick, sending a spray of dust into the air. The sheer force of it startled Rick, and panic flickered in his eyes as he realized he was losing this battle. Joe shouted, each heartbeat infused with the tenacity of generations past, the farmers who had stood resilient against storms and adversities, the fighters who had nurtured the very earth beneath their feet. Finally, Rick turned to sprint back to his truck, a flood of fear breaking through his earlier facade of confidence. He scrambled into the driver's seat, Joe's gaze piercing through the window like a blade of truth. The engine roared to life, and in a hasty retreat, Rick sped off, tires kicking up clouds of dust that hung in the air long after he was gone. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the distant chirping of crickets beginning their evening serenade. For a moment, Joe stood there, breath coming in heavy gasps, the weight of adrenaline coursing through him. He looked back at the fields, the golden stalks of corn bending gently in the breeze, and felt a rush of triumph wash over him. He had defended his home. He had fought for every heartbeat that pulsed within him. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the landscape, unease nibbled at the corners of Joe's victory. This was just the beginning. The world was changing, and what he had achieved today could vanish as quickly as the dust that still settled on the ground. Back at the farmhouse, Joe found his wife, Sarah, watering the garden, her face lighting up as she saw him. She asked, concern knitting her brow. Just had a visitor, Joe replied, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Some fella tried to buy me out. Sarah's eyes widened. Joe nodded, the adrenaline still coursing through him, but the weight of the reality crashed back down. A little. Her relief mixed with anxiety as she took his hands, grounding him in the moment. He took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of her touch. Then we'll be ready for him, he said with conviction. I won't let anyone take our home. As the evening unfolded, the couple sat out on the porch, the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Each breath of the cool air began to soothe Joe's frayed nerves, but the thought of future threats loomed ominously in the back of his mind. Joe, Sarah began, voice soft yet firm, what do we do next? He nodded, understanding the urgency. We prepare, he said. We talk to the neighbors, rally the community. This isn't just my fight, it's ours. With every passing day, the two became steadfast in their resolve, reaching out to fellow farmers, sharing stories over coffee, and organizing meetings in the dim light of their barn. They drew strength from each other and cultivated a sense of unity that began to ripple through the community. As days bled into weeks, Rick's name became synonymous with threat, an emblem of the changing tides threatening their way of life. Fear hung heavily in the air, but as they planned and strategized, something remarkable happened. The farmers banded together, forging relationships that had been left unspoken for too long. A sense of camaraderie began to blossom. Stories that had once been solitary began to intertwine, each tale of struggle feeding the fire within them. And then one day, in the midst of their preparations, the truck returned. The familiar rumble broke through the serenity, a sound that sent shivers down Joe's spine. With a mix of determination and dread, Joe stepped outside, flanked by supportive neighbors who had gathered for moral support, strong men and women who fiercely defended their futures. Joe stood firm, pitchfork resting gently at his side but ready for action. Rick emerged from the truck, flanked by two men in dark suits, their expressions steely and cold, devoid of warmth. Well, 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 Rick said, leaning against his truck with a devilish grin. Looks like I've got an audience. Just making sure you know you're not dealing with an easy target, Joe replied, voice low and resonant. Rick glanced at his companions, a wry smile creeping across his lips. You think you can intimidate me with numbers? Joe challenged, stepping closer, heart pounding but voice steady. Opportunities for us. The tension thickened like a fog surrounding them, and the air smelled of impending confrontation. Behind Joe, his neighbors stood sturdy as oak trees, unwavering in support. This was about more than just land, it was about community, history, love, and legacy. Let's cut to the chase. You have a chance to make this easy or hard, Rick said, arrogance dripping from his words like a poison. I'm offering you cash to walk away. Why don't you go home? Joe felt the pulse of the earth beneath him, a rhythm that echoed the solidarity of the people beside him. You need to listen, Rick. We won't just let you walk in and bully us into submission. You're making a big mistake, Rick shot back, frustration flashing in his eyes, mingling with disbelief. This won't end well for you, Joe. I may not stop it, but I sure as hell will stand up against it, Joe said, his voice ringing with clarity and conviction. The standoff stretched, a clash of opposites locked in a tense ballet, and the reality of the moment settled like a heavy weight. The stakes were high. The echoes of history flooded Joe's mind. He was not just defending the land. He was defending a worldview, a love for the soil, a connection to every pulse that had come before him. Rick asked, glaring defiantly at the farmers gathered around Joe, confident yet desperate. Never, Joe declared. His voice rang out like a bell, each word infused with the strength of every ancestor before him. In that instant, the resolve of the farmers solidified, each one of them standing taller, shoulders back, united in a common purpose. They had stories to tell and legacies to defend. They felt the power of their roots intertwining, of history breathing life into their fight. Rick realized then that he was not facing just one man, but an unbreakable front of community, passion, and dedication. Fine, he sneered, backing down slowly, but anger still simmering in his voice. With that, he turned away, retreating to the truck, leaving behind a group of farmers who stood resolute and unyielding in their conviction. As the dust settled and the truck roared off, a soft sigh of relief washed over the farmers. Joe turned to his neighbors, gratitude swelling in his chest. We did it, he breathed, overwhelmed by a wave of unity. But even in celebration, a sense of vigilance flickered at the back of his mind. This wasn't over. The fight for their way of life would continue, and they knew they needed to stay connected. In the weeks that followed, they held gatherings, planning for a future that would stand the test of time. They shared resources, pooled knowledge, and strategized their next steps. This was about so much more than land. It was about nurturing a community that could protect what truly mattered. And as they stood together through sleepless nights and exhausting efforts, Farmer Joe felt an unshakable determination rooting itself deep within his heart. Every challenge bred opportunity for growth. Every confrontation rippled with strength. On the horizon, the sun began to rise, casting a golden light over the fields that stretched endlessly, marking a new day, a new battle, a future waiting to be shaped. Together, the farmers of this undying land stood resolute, ready to face whatever came their way, stronger than ever against the threats that loomed, equipped with unity, love, and the fierce belief that they would pull faster than any truck that dared to roll onto their land. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields of golden wheat that danced in the breeze. Farmer Tim was on his knees, hands deep in the rich earth, planting the last seeds of the season. There was a rhythm to the work, a comfort he found in the soil. Each seed was not just a grain, it was a promise, a symbol of hope that brought life, sustenance, and legacy. But just then, like a thunderstorm brewing on the horizon, the peaceful hum of the farm was shattered. A truck roared down the gravel road, kicking up clouds of dust that hung in the still air. Tim stopped, instinctively straightening up, uncertainty twisting in his gut. This truck was unlike any that rolled through these parts, a sleek, black beast that rumbled with an aggressive cadence. A wave of anxiety washed over him. Trouble often came in the form of shiny vehicles, and Tim didn't like the feeling that crept up his spine. The truck screeched to a halt on his property, gravel crunching beneath its weight like bones snapping. The driver's door swung open, and out stepped a tall figure clad in a dark leather jacket, an unsettling confidence radiating from him. Tim's heart quickened. He had seen enough in his years to know when trouble was brewing. The stranger called, voice loud and brash, cutting through the serenity like a knife. "You the farmer, Tim, right?" Tim replied cautiously, wiping his hands on his jeans, feeling the tension knotted in his shoulders. "Name's Rick," the man said, flashing a grin that sent a shiver down Tim's spine. "I'm here to talk about this land." Tim's mind raced. The land, this land. He could feel the blood drain from his face. "I'm not selling," he said firmly, despite the unease seeping into his bones. Rick chuckled dismissively, stepping closer, his swagger oozing arrogance. "You might want to reconsider. This piece of land is ripe for development." Tim stood his ground, fists clenching. This place was more than dirt and crop. It was the legacy of his family. His father had toiled here and his grandfather before him. "This land is my life. My family built it." Rick's brow furrowed, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. "You're just a stubborn farmer stuck in the past. Don't you want to enjoy the good life?" Anger flared in Tim's chest, hot and unyielding. "You think you can just waltz in here and take what's mine?" "Business is business," Rick shot back, dismissiveness etched across his features. "And from what I see, you're in over your head." Tim's heart pounded. He could feel the energy in the air shift. It was as if a storm was building. He had spent years nurturing this land, and he wasn't about to watch someone stomp all over it. "I won't let you destroy my home," he declared, voice steady but fierce. With a lurch of movement that caught Tim off guard, Rick lunged toward him, the intent clear as day. Tim reacted instinctively, adrenaline surging through him. He sidestepped, grabbing the nearest thing, the old pitchfork leaning against the barn. He pointed it at Rick, every muscle in his body coiling tight with tension. Tim commanded, his heart racing. The pitchfork felt foreign yet familiar, an embodiment of his roots and resolve. Rick laughed, but there was a tremor beneath the bravado. He scoffed, but the glint in his eyes said otherwise. "I think you have no idea who you're dealing with," Tim shot back, stance firm. "This land has been fought for long before you showed up." The prickly air crackled with energy, the weight of their confrontation threatening to rupture at any moment. Tim felt the fierce pulse of life swirling around him, the wheat bending in the wind, the earth beneath his feet, and the history that whispered through the fields. He knew then that this was about more than just land. It was about dignity, pride, and the spirit of every farmer who had ever dared to stand their ground. "You're making a big mistake, buddy," Rick warned, his voice now tinged with irritation. "Not as big as you think," Tim countered, his resolve solidifying. The tension snapped, and Rick lunged forward in a desperate attempt to wrest the pitchfork from Tim's grip. They grappled, the sound of their scuffle blending with the rustling wheat, a chaotic symphony of raw emotion. Sweat poured down Tim's back as he fought back, channeling the energy of his ancestors who had tilled the same soil he now stood upon. Rick shouted, desperate now, his earlier bravado crumbling. At that moment, Tim felt an electric pulse surge through him, a wild fire igniting at his core. He roared, thrusting forward with the pitchfork. The metal glinted sharply in the sunlight, a powerful emblem of his defiance. Rick staggered back, shock mingling with fear in his eyes. He turned, realizing he was outmatched, and bolted toward his truck, heart racing with defeat. Tim stood firm, pitchfork raised, adrenaline still coursing through his veins as he watched the truck peel away, kicking up dust into the air, a cloud of uncertainty and frustration hanging in the space behind him. Breathless, he looked around at the fields and felt a knot of tension begin to ease within him. This was more than a victory. It was a moment etched into his soul. He had faced down intimidation, defended his home, and for once the land felt more alive than it ever had before. But as the adrenaline settled into a muted hum, other feelings began to rise up within him: fear of what might come next, dread of future encounters. Rick was not just a stranger. He represented a world that saw land as a commodity, a thing to exploit rather than cherish. The sun continued to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields as Tim turned and walked back to his farmhouse. Inside, the familiar warmth greeted him, but concern tugged at his gut. His wife, Mary, was in the kitchen, kneading dough for dinner. She asked, glancing up from her work, noticing the tension in his shoulders. "A man came here today," Tim replied, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. Mary's expression shifted. Tim took a deep breath, the tension of the day washing back over him. Maybe not directly, but he came here with an offer that felt more like a threat. Mary moved closer, concern etched across her face. What if he comes back? Yeah, I know, Tim said, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. But it's not just about me. It's about all of us, the farmers around here, the land we share. As the evening light faded and the stars blinked into existence, Tim and Mary discussed their next steps, voices growing firmer with each exchange. They called their neighbors, sharing the story and rallying support, knowing that unity would be their greatest strength. They began to understand that this wasn't just a personal fight. It was a battle for every family that called this landscape home. The days turned into weeks, and one thing became clear: Rick wasn't finished. Tim's heart raced every time he heard a vehicle approaching, scanning the horizon for that foreboding truck. Then one fateful afternoon, the distant rumble reached his ears, and he felt the all-too-familiar tightening in his stomach. Together with Mary and the community, they stood united at the edge of the fields as the truck came into view this time, with Rick at the wheel and two men in suits beside him. Fear rippled through the crowd, but determination hardened their expressions. Joe stepped forward, and as Rick approached, he could see that the man wore an expression that was equal parts arrogance and desperation. "I told you, Tim," Rick said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're running out of option. I'm offering you one last chance. Let it go." Tim felt a surge of anger but steadied himself, taking a deep breath while looking back at his friends and neighbors behind him. "You really think you can intimidate us?" Rick's smirk faltered, replaced with frustration. "You're just one stubborn man." "Then I guess it's a fight you want," Tim replied, resolve hardening in his eyes. Suddenly, the mood shifted, tension thickening the air. The weight of history rested between them, the struggles of families intertwined with the soil, the stories of hardship and triumph serving as a shield against the tide of greed threatening to suffocate their way of life. Rick shouted, but the chaos in his voice only fueled their determination to stand fast. He glanced at his companions, unsure whether to push on or retreat. Tim shouted back, raising his voice so the whole community could hear. "Fight us if you must, but know this, you will lose." With that, the final stand was solidified. The farmers enveloped Tim, united and ready, each one embodying the spirit of their shared legacy. They had come together, forged alliances through adversity, and he could feel the warmth of their solidarity wrapping around him like a shield. For a moment, Rick stood frozen, a reluctant wave of realization washing over him. It was clear he had underestimated the resolve of the farmers who stood against him. The community wasn't just a collection of individuals. It was a force, a testament to the strength that comes from shared purpose. Finally, with a defeated expression, Rick glanced back at his companions and then climbed into his truck. "You'll regret this," he muttered, the threat hanging in the air even as the engine roared to life. As the truck drove away, the farmers erupted into cheers, a burst of relief mingling with triumph, the weight of their fears lifting like the first rays of dawn. They had pulled together, battling not only for their land but for each other. Tim felt a surge of gratitude wash over him as he turned to his neighbors, pride swelling in his chest. Today wasn't just a victory, it was a reaffirmation of their commitment to protect what mattered most. That night, as they gathered around a bonfire in the field, laughter and stories floated through the air, blending with the crackling flames. Hope surged within each farmer as they toasted to their unity, their resilience against the looming storm of change. Tim stood at the center of it all, watching the flickering flames dance against the night sky, his heart full. They had weathered the fight and learned that they were stronger together, capable of facing anything that threatened their land and their lives. As the stars twinkled above, Tim felt the weight of history settle comfortably on his shoulders, a reminder of all those who had come before him, fighting to hold onto their roots. His resolve was unwavering. He would be the guardian of this land, pulling faster against the tides of change, ready to confront whatever came next. And they would stand together, stronger than ever, ready to fight for every seed sown, every memory cherished, every ounce of love woven into the fabric of their community. Each farmer, each heart, stood molded as one, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who refused to back down, no matter the odds stacked against them. The fight wasn't over, but now they were in it together. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the golden fields that stretched endlessly. Farmer Ben knelt in the dirt, his hands caked with soil, tending to the crops he had nurtured for years. Each seed planted was a chapter in his life, his family's legacy written into the earth. As he worked, the rhythmic sounds of nature surrounded him, the wind whispering through the corn, the distant call of a hawk riding the thermals. It was peaceful, and Ben cherished this tranquility. But then came the raw and unexpected growl that pierced the serenity like a jagged knife. A truck pulled in fast, dust spiraling into the air as if an army had arrived. Ben looked up, heart racing. The sleek, dark vehicle contrasted starkly with the sun-drenched landscape, and a feeling of dread cinched around him. He had seen enough outside influences, enough greed to recognize that this truck wasn't bringing anything good. The vehicle screeched to a halt, gravel flying, the door swinging open with a loud bang. A man stepped out, tall and imposing in a leather jacket, sunglasses hiding his eyes like a predator ready to pounce. Ben felt his gut tighten with instinctual worry. He had worked this land long enough to understand when trouble was lurking in the shadows. The man called out, swaggering closer with an air of confidence as if he owned not just the truck but the world. "Name's Rick." Ben straightened, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. Rick smirked, stepping into the golden light, almost radiating a sense of menace. "Your land, buddy, it's time to sell." "Not a chance," Ben replied, the firmness in his voice matching the strength of his resolve. This land wasn't just a patch of earth to him, it was family. "I'm not interested in selling." Rick chuckled, a sound that echoed with arrogance. "You're home, look around. Farming isn't what it used to be. The market's shifting." Anger bubbled beneath Ben's calm exterior. "This land has been in my family for generations." Rick's smile faded, irritation creeping into his features. "You're just one stubborn farmer among many." The air grew thick with tension, crackling like electricity before a storm. Ben felt the weight of his heritage pressing down on him, a legacy of hard work and sacrifice that couldn't be measured in dollars. "You don't understand what this land means to me," he said, stepping forward, fists clenching at his sides. Rick didn't back down. Instead, he leaned in closer, the arrogance in his demeanor morphing into aggression. "You have no idea who you're messing with," he warned, voice low and dangerous. "I've got connections." Without warning, Rick lunged forward and panic surged in Ben's chest. He instinctively grabbed the pitchfork leaning against the barn, the familiar grip sending a rush of adrenaline through his veins. He shouted, pointing the pitchfork toward Rick, heart racing. Rick laughed, though there was no real confidence behind it. He took a step back, eyeing the pitchfork as if unsure what to do next. "This is my land," Ben shouted, feeling the passion rise within him. Rick hesitated, uncertainty flickering in his eyes, but then he squared his shoulders, stepping forward again. "You think a rusty pitchfork can stop me?" With a surge of determination, Ben lunged forward, pitchfork ready, feeling the fury of generations behind him as he defended his home. Each movement was fueled by years of labor, the blood and sweat of his ancestors guiding his hands. Heat pulsed through him, each clash between them reverberating against the vast fields, nature itself bearing witness to this showdown. "Your greed doesn't stand a chance against my love for this land," Ben growled, clenching the pitchfork tighter. Rick stumbled back, caught off guard by Ben's fierceness. He spat, recovering and trying to regain control, but Ben could see the shift, the bravado draining, fear creeping into the cracks. "Game." Ben shot back, feeling the weight of the land surge through him. The struggle intensified, a wild storm of emotions crashing together. Fear, resolve, anger all blending into an electrifying moment of defiance. They battled, bodies colliding in a whirlwind of chaos and conviction, the pitchfork a symbol of everything Ben held dear. The sun beat down on them as they wrestled for dominance, each second stretching like an eternity. Time seemed to warp around them, the fields alive with whispers of encouragement, the roots of his family tree entwined in his fists. He could feel the very ground beneath him, the years of toil erupting into a surge of defiance. Finally, with one powerful swing, Ben thrust the pitchfork forward, its prongs digging into the dirt beside Rick, sending a spatter of stones and dirt into the air. The realization hit Rick, panic flooding his features as he stumbled back, realizing he was outmatched. "You'll regret this," he warned breathlessly, scrambling back toward his truck, retreating in defeat. As the engine roared to life and the truck screeched away, a wave of relief washed over Ben. He dropped the pitchfork, gasping for breath, heart hammering in his chest as the dust settled around him. He had fought for his land, for his home, and against all odds he had pulled faster. But even as the adrenaline began to wear off, uncertainty settled in like an unwelcome visitor. The victory tasted sweet, but the threat remained palpable, lingering like an echo in the air. Rick would return. He had laid claim to something that didn't belong to him, and Ben knew it was far from over. Walking back to the farmhouse, the weight of the confrontation hung in the air, the golden field stretching endless and unsure before him. He stepped inside where the familiar warmth flooded his senses. His wife Mary met him in the kitchen, an apron tied around her waist. She looked up, concern etching her features. She asked, her voice laced with worry. "A man came by," Ben replied, hands trembling slightly. "He wanted to buy the land." Mary's eyes widened. "Did you?" "I had to," he admitted, still catching his breath. Mary stepped closer, her face a mixture of pride and concern. "What if he comes back?" Ben sighed, the dread creeping back into his chest. I won't let him take our home." As the days wore on, that terrifying afternoon replayed in Ben's mind. Rick's threats hung like dark clouds on the horizon, a sign of the storm to come. He reached out to his fellow farmers, organizing meetings, sharing stories, forging bonds against an impending tide of greed and exploitation. This was no longer just about his fight. It was about every farmer who tended their land with devotion, every family that called this place home. On a Friday afternoon, they gathered under the broad oak tree at the edge of the fields, anxiety mixing with resolve in the air. Ben stood before his neighbors, their faces worn but determined. "Look, we all know Rick is coming back," he said, expressing the urgency that gnawed at him. "He doesn't want just my land, he wants to wipe out every farmer that stands in his way." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. They began to share their own experiences, stories of similar encounters, memories of sacrifices made. With each testimony, the resolve in Ben's heart grew stronger. Then, just as the sun set behind the hills, a noise shattered the murmurs of solidarity, the roar of an engine cutting through the stillness. All heads turned to see the black truck speeding toward them again, dust rising in its wake, a dark omen against the golden fields. Ben shouted, gripping his pitchfork tightly, nerves firing as Rick's truck screeched to a halt, the sound of gravel crunching beneath its tires echoing through the air. Rick stepped out, now accompanied by two men in sharp suits, their expressions flat and serious. Well, Rick drawled, confidence woven into his words. "Looks like you've gathered the cavalry." "This is our land," Ben said, stepping forward, unwavering. Rick laughed, but this time it didn't hold the same power. "You think staying tight-knit will save you?" "It is personal," Ben shot back. "Every inch of this land is personal." Rick's gaze hardened, and the men beside him exchanged glances. They had come prepared, and suddenly Ben felt the raw weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Here's the deal, Tim," Rick said, voice low, threatening. "You sell now or I'll make sure you regret this." In that moment, a flicker of doubt crossed Ben's mind, the kind that every farmer wrestled with at least once, a fleeting thought of giving in to the growing wave of pressure, but he quickly brushed it aside. "You're right about one thing," he replied, holding his ground. "You don't know us." The tension crackled in the air, thick like the humidity before a storm. Ben felt the eyes of his neighbors on him, their lives intertwined with his, and he couldn't falter now. He raised the pitchfork, resolute. "As long as I draw breath, I'll defend what's ours." Rick hesitated, his bravado fading for the briefest moment as doubt crept into the cracks of his confidence. The men beside him shifted uneasily, sensing the weight of the moment. "Fine. Keep your land for now," Rick spat, his voice dripping with anger. "But know this, every day that you refuse, I will make it harder for you." Without waiting for a response, Rick turned on his heel, climbing back into the truck. The engine roared to life, kicking up dirt as the truck veered away from the gathering, leaving a cloud of uncertainty behind. A stunned silence enveloped them, hearts pounding, minds racing. But it was broken by a raucous cheer from the assembled farmers. They had stood together, and in that moment, it felt like a small yet significant victory, one that resonated with the spirit of their ancestors, who had tilled the same soil and fought through the toughest of storms. Ben could hardly believe what had just happened, pride swelling within him. He declared, and as the sun descended, painting the sky with vibrant hues, hope flickered anew in every heart gathered there. But the truth lingered heavily, that while they had stood their ground today, the fight was far from over. With heavy hearts and minds fully aware of the challenges ahead, they gathered together once more, arms entwined, commitment unbreakable, a community forged in defiance, resilient in spirit. Days turned into weeks, and the threads of camaraderie grew tighter as they supported one another, preparing for whatever Rick might throw their way. The unity shared among the farmers ignited a fire, a determination that radiated through every meeting, every shared farm lunch, and every long night spent strategizing. One evening, as they sat around a fire, laughter mingled with stories, and the spirit of community swelled. Ben realized that the fight for his land had morphed into something bigger than he had ever anticipated. They were no longer just standing against a singular threat. They were standing for a shared way of life. As summer turned to fall, the golden fields ripened under the sun, a testament to their hard work. Yet the fear of Rick still loomed over them, a reminder of the struggle that lay ahead. Then, as the leaves began to turn, the shadows lengthened, and the air grew crisp with anticipation. One fateful day, just as the crops were ready for harvest, the distant rumble of the familiar truck reached their ears yet again. Ben's heart raced as the dark figure emerged on the horizon, dread curling in his stomach like a serpent. He commanded his neighbors, feeling the fight coursing through him once more. Together, they formed a solid wall of farmers, unwavering against the encroaching threat. Rick stepped out, flanked by his suit-clad companions again, but there was something different about his demeanor. He looked agitated, the tension in his body palpable. "You know, I thought you'd have seen reason by now," he sneered, addressing the crowd. Ben asked, standing tall. "Oh, we're beyond that," Rick replied, a smirk creeping onto his face. "This isn't about the land anymore. It's about the power. I control the market, and I will make things difficult for you." With each word, Ben could see the desperation pooling in Rick's eyes. The confidence once radiating off the man began to fade like the evening light. He took a step forward, pitchfork still in hand, the weight of the community behind him. "You're underestimating us, Rick. You don't understand that we have something you can't touch." The farmers stood resolute, their silence echoing the truth of Ben's words. The power was palpable, a vibrational force that rippled through the air as if the very earth itself was standing with them. Rick's bravado faltered. "You think this is about spirit? You'll see. I will win." And then, without warning, he turned, exiting the scene in a rush, leaving behind a cloud of dust and uncertainty for the last time. Breathless silence filled the space where their voices had been, the gravity of the confrontation settling into their bones. Yet as the dust cleared, Ben felt a sense of victory overwhelm his heart. They had stood their ground, united against a tide that sought to crush them. "It's not over," he said, turning to his neighbors, a gleam of conviction in his eyes. With that, they came together, gathering around him in support, a solidified group forged in the fires of adversity, unbreakable in their resolve. In that moment, they understood that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side, stronger together, defiantly rooted in the land they loved. The sun began to set, shining down on the fields that had seen generations of struggle and love, a testament that grew stronger through every storm they faced. This was their land, their legacy, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would make them let go. They were farmers, guardians of the earth, and they would pull faster than any truck that dared to drive into their lives. The fight would continue, but they were ready. Together, forever entrenched in the battle for their dreams, their history, and their very souls. A cloud of dust billowed up from the gravel road as a truck pulled in fast, tires crunching aggressively. Farmer Dave looked up from where he kneeled in the dirt, digging his hands into the rich black earth of his family's farm, a place steeped in history and the memories of generations. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, but that familiar sense of peace was shattered in an instant. His heart pressed heavy in his chest as he rose to his feet, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. The crunching of gravel became louder, more demanding, and that instinctive pit of anxiety coiled tightly within him. This wasn't just any truck. It was a menacing black pickup, sleek and shiny, but radiating a vibe that set off alarm bells in Dave's mind. The truck screeched to an abrupt stop right in front of him, sending dust spiraling into the golden afternoon light. The door swung open, and out stepped a figure clad in a leather jacket, a man whose swagger screamed arrogance and entitlement. Dave's senses heightened, his instincts sharpening like a blade as he took a step forward. He asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though the tightening in his gut betrayed his unease. The man adjusted his sunglasses and flashed a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Name's Rick," he said, voice dripping with false charm. Dave narrowed his eyes. The words tasted bitter, like betrayal on his tongue. The farm had been in his family for generations. It was not just land to him, but a sacred trust, a living history embedded in the soil. "Yeah, that's right," Rick continued, stepping closer. "I'm prepared to make you a very nice offer, enough for you to retire, kick back on a beach somewhere." The air seemed to thicken as Dave's heart slammed against his ribs. "You think I just sell what my family has built?" Rick laughed, a sound that rang hollow, devoid of sincerity. "History. Come on, Dave. This land has seen better days. Farming is dying and you know it. You're just one man out here." Anger sparked within Dave, threatening to boil over. He clenched his fists, feeling the heat surge through his veins. He shot back, his voice gaining strength from a deep-rooted pride. "Oh, I think I do," Rick replied, arrogance oozing from every word. "You think your stubbornness can stop progress." The intensity of the moment wrapped around them, thickening the air like humidity before a storm. Dave felt every heartbeat echoing in his ears, the weight of the past pressing down on him, urging him to stand firm. "Get off my property," he said, grounding himself in his resolve. But Rick only stepped forward, invading Dave's space, eyes cold and calculating. "You'll regret this," he warned, a thinly veiled threat hanging in the air like a noose. Then, in an instant, Rick lunged at Dave, desperation and aggression intertwining in a frightening dance. But Dave was ready. He sidestepped, adrenaline pumping, and he grabbed the pitchfork propped against the barn, an old but trusty tool, its weight familiar in his hands. "Come any closer and you'll find out what happens when you threaten a farmer," he growled, gripping the pitchfork tightly, his heart racing not just from fear but fierce determination. Rick paused, surprise flickering across his face. He laughed, though the uncertainty in his eyes said otherwise. "I don't need to scare you," Dave said, his voice steady. And then they were locked in an unexpected standoff. The sun seemed to hang in the air, the world around them holding its breath. Each man stood firm, eyes locked in a fierce battle of wills. Behind Dave, the fields of corn whispered softly, rustling in support, the very essence of the land rallying around him. Rick made another move, stepping forward with an aggressive sneer. "You really think you can stand against me? I've got connections and resources." But in that moment, it was as if a spark ignited in Dave's chest, a fire that surged through him, fueled by the countless hours of labor, love, and sweat. This land wasn't just soil, it was family. It was lineage. It was everything he held dear. "You underestimate me," he said, thrusting the pitchfork forward, grounding himself in the promise of the generations before him. The confrontation escalated, tension electrically charged, each breath felt heavy with uncertainty and rage. The world around them faded to nothing but this moment, two men poised on the precipice of conflict. Dave yelled, all at once both terrified and invigorated. He was fighting for something that ran much deeper than land. It was a battle for dignity, for heart, for heritage. And then it happened. Ben lunged with the pitchfork, breathless with adrenaline and defiance. He thrust forward, aiming to establish dominance, but Rick dodged, barely avoiding the prongs. Flustered, he tried to regain his composure, but in doing so, he stepped too close once again. With one determined swing, the pitchfork struck the earth beside him, causing Rick to stumble backward, the color draining from his face. Rick sputtered, backing away, realizing he had underestimated this simple farmer. "That's what you get for underestimating a man who's fought his whole life to defend what he loves," Dave shouted back, voice echoing powerfully across the field. Realizing he was losing, Rick spun on his heel, scrambling back to his truck. "You'll regret this, Dave." As the engine roared to life and the truck sped away, kicking up a cloud of dust that settled heavy in the air, a wave of relief flooded over him. He had pulled faster, he had defended his land, but even as the adrenaline began to fade, unease set in. This was just a skirmish. Rick would return, he was too invested. Dave stood amidst the quiet that followed, heart still pounding, yet the weight of uncertainty pressed upon him. The danger had simply retreated, but it hadn't dissipated. After a long moment, he took a deep breath and turned toward the farmhouse. Inside, his wife, Jessica, was waiting. She peered at him from the kitchen, flour dusting her hands and concern etched on her brow. She asked, concern flooding her voice as she stepped closer, the warmth of home wrapping around him. "A man came here today," Dave replied, wiping sweat from his forehead, still feeling the tremors of confrontation. "He wanted to buy the land." Jessica's eyes widened. "Did he threaten you?" "I'm fine," he reassured her, though the adrenaline was still coursing through him and the shadows of unease flickered in the corners of his mind. "But he won't stop. I can't let him take this place." That night, as they sat at the table, the comfort of home surrounded them, but the threat loomed high. They strategized, discussing neighbors and allies, the vitality of the community surrounding them. "Dave," Jessica said, voice firm, "this is not just your fight. We stand together with the others." In the weeks that followed, they gathered the community, sharing the story of that fateful day. The farmers pooled their resources, knowledge, and strength. They met under a fading barn roof where the light dimmed, united against the encroaching shadows. They would face Rick as one solid entity, refusing to be divided or intimidated. As the golden fields ripened, so did the relationships forged out of necessity. The bond tightened as each farmer shared in the fear, the hopes, and the hard-fought battles over the land. They turned into a powerful collective, forming strategies, learning from one another, and igniting a spirit of resistance that echoed in the wind. Then, just as summer began to fade, the familiar rumble of the truck rumbled once more. Eyes narrowed, hearts quickened, and the air shimmered with anxiety. Time for confrontation had come again, and as Ben stood shoulder to shoulder with his neighbors, he could feel the weight of their collective spirit. Rick emerged from the truck, a darker look in his eyes this time, flanked by those same men in suits, now oozing menace that hung in the air like smoke. "You've made a mistake standing together. This isn't going to end well for any of you," he said, venom in his voice. Ben shouted, stepping forward. For a moment, Rick's bravado wavered, caught between fear and rage. "You really think this is still about land? This is about power now." "We won't be roadblocks anymore," Ben replied, voice steady with conviction. Then Rick smirked, a chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're in deeper than you think, farmer." In that moment, the air grew heavier still, thick with the weight of unspoken promises and looming battles, and as the winds of change began to swirl around them, a sense of uncertainty filled Ben's heart. He felt the pull of desperation, worrying that their unity might not be enough. Ben cried, a fierce rallying cry echoing into the twilight. "We will fight for our land, for our families." Rick's laugh rang hollow, echoing ominously as he turned back to the truck. "Mark my words, farmer." As he climbed back into the vehicle, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of red and orange, the perfect backdrop for the looming storm. And as the truck faded from view, the air hung heavy with uncertainty and hope, a chilling reminder that while they had united against a common adversary, the battle was far from over. Ben took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges that lay ahead. Little did he realize that the true fight had only just begun. Tension hung thick, and as night fell around them, so too did a shadow of dread. What would Rick do next? The stakes were higher than ever, and the reality of their struggle loomed now, more daunting than ever before. For a rural community that thrived on the simple life of farming, they would have to confront an adversary who had no intention of letting go easily. The trucks and the threats were there to stay. It would be up to them to rise, to stand, and to be ready for whatever came next. In that moment of shared silence, beneath the darkening sky, they felt the first tremors of uncertainty that would test their bonds. Would they pull faster when the storm finally broke? Only time would tell, as the end of one battle only signaled the beginning of another.